All right, we are in Genesis
Thank
18.
you.
All right. Then the Lord appeared to him by the terebinth tree of Mamre, as he was sitting in the tent of the door in the heat of the day. So he lifted his eyes and looked, and behold, 3 men were standing by him. And when he saw them, he ran from the tent of the door to meet them, and bowed himself down to the ground, and said, My Lord, if I have now found favor in your sight, do not pass on by me, by your servant. Please let a little water be brought and wash your feet and rest yourselves under the tree.
Let me get you something to eat so you can be refreshed and then go on your way, now that you have come to your servant. Very well, they answered, do as you say. So Abraham hurried to the tent to Sarah. Quick, he said, get 3 seahs of the finest flour and knead and bake some bread. Then he ran to the herd and selected a choice tender calf and gave it to a servant, who hurried to prepare it. He then brought some curds and milk and the calf that had been prepared and set these before them. And while they ate, he stood near them under a tree.
Then they said to him, Where is Sarah, your wife? So he said, Here in the tent. And she said, I will certainly return to you according to the time of life. And behold, Sarah, your wife, shall have a son. Sarah was listening in the tent door, which was behind him. And now Abraham and Sarah were old, well advanced in age, and Sarah had passed the age of childbearing. Therefore Sarah laughed within herself, saying, After I have grown old, shall I have pleasure, my Lord being old also?
All right, Fred and Julia.
And the Lord said to Abraham, why did Sarah laugh? Why did she say, can an old woman like me have a baby? Is anything too hard for the Lord? I will return about this time next year, and Sarah will have a son. Sarah was afraid, so she denied it, saying, I didn't laugh. But the Lord said, no, you did laugh. Then the men got up from their meal and looked out toward Sodom. As they left, Abraham went with them and sent them on their way.
Should I hide my plan from Abraham? The Lord asked. For Abraham will certainly become a great and mighty nation, and all the nations of the earth will be blessed through him. I have singled him out so that he will direct his sons and their families to keep the way of the Lord by doing what is right and just. Then I will do for Abraham all that I have promised. So the Lord told Abraham, I have heard a great outcry from Sodom and Gomorrah, because their sin is so flagrant.
All right, Dawn and Elaine.
I am going down to see if their actions are as wicked as I have heard. If not, I want to know. The other men turned and headed toward Sodom, but the Lord remained with Abraham. Abraham approached him and said, will you sweep away both the righteous and the wicked? Suppose you find 50 righteous people living there in the city. Will you still sweep it away and not spare it for their sake? Surely you wouldn't do such a thing, destroying the righteous along with the wicked. Why you would be treating the righteous and the wicked exactly the same. Surely you wouldn't do that. Should not the judge of all the earth do what is right? And the Lord replied, if I find 50 righteous people in Sodom, I will spare the entire city for their sake. Then Abraham spoke again. Since I have begun, let me speak further to my Lord, even though I am but dust and ashes.
Suppose there are only 45 righteous people rather than 50. Will you destroy the whole city for lack of 5? And the Lord said, I will not destroy it if I find 45 righteous people there. Then Abraham pressed his request further. Suppose there are only 40. And the Lord replied, I will not destroy it for the sake of the 40. Tell me when it's done. Please don't be angry, my Lord, Abraham pleaded. Let me speak. Suppose only 30 righteous people are found. And the Lord replied, I will not destroy it if I find 30. Is that right?
All right.
I don't know if I
Sherry,
did
why don't you go
so-
ahead and
did I
finish it up?
do-
Sorry. Oh, yeah. Sherry, why don't you go finish it up?
Then Abraham said, since I have dared to speak to the Lord, let me continue. Suppose there are only 20. And the Lord replied, then I will not destroy it for the sake of the 20. Finally, Abraham said, Lord, please don't be angry with me if I speak one more time. Suppose only 10 are found there. And the Lord replied, then I will not destroy it for the sake of 10. When the Lord had finished his conversation with Abraham, he went on his way, and Abraham returned to his tent.
Okie doke. Does anything stand out in this chapter?
It kind of seemed right in the beginning that the Abraham with his guests wanted to feed them.
Right.
Um,
And I think one of the things that really stands out there is in verse 1 is the Lord appeared again to Abraham, and the Lord is Yahweh, which tells us, for me anyway, that the 3 guests were God. Now, some commentaries would actually say this was God and 2 angels, but for me, there's nothing in here that would say that. It just is, and Yahweh appeared again. And so we're thinking, I'm thinking that this was the Trinity appearing before Abraham.
But
Now,
does that mean that God the Father and the Holy Spirit went to Gomorrah or Sodom? Because it said that at the end that these 2 angels went on ahead, and we assumed that they were going to Sodom, and that they were the ones that went to Lot's house.
oh, I see. And the men got up from their meal and looked out towards Sodom.
Yeah.
Is that what you mean? They went towards Sodom?
Well, that they were the ones that went to
Verse 9,
warn Lot later on in the next chapter.
in 19 verse 1.
Oh,
Does
okay.
that even the two angels came to the entrance of the city, and I just assumed that they were the same 2 that were with Jesus when they stopped to visit with Abraham.
Yeah, that would probably be why the commentaries would say it's the 2 angels.
Well, and I also wondered whether at first whether Abraham recognized them or not, because when he, in the New Living Transfer, when he says my Lord, the Lord is lowercase.
Right.
I'm assuming he didn't recognize them. He just, which to me speaks of his hospitality. It's not like
Right.
he knew these guys were anybody. They were just people walking through, and he's like, hey, come and rest a while. I'll prepare a meal for you and stuff.
Right. Right. It could very well be. Now, what's interesting for me is if that's the case, I don't know where he recognized that they were no longer, just ordinary guys.
I was wondering whether it was when he predicted the birth of a son in a year, whether he thought, oh, well, maybe this is God who stopped, and because it's the same message he gave him before, only now he gave him a time frame.
Right. Yeah, it could very well be. And it's interesting that Abram, it's like his reactions never change. You know how there's some people that once they figure out that this was an angel, like John the Revelator, when he realized it was an angel, he
Yeah,
just
he fell
fell.
down. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Seems like Abram was just, it's like, just
Oh, hey, it's
like you
you.
said, right.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's definitely a lot of questions
Yeah.
on this one, but I think those are very good points.
Well, like I say, I think it's kind of cool that it shows Abraham's character, that and I don't know, maybe he was just lonely. Maybe, hey, there's strangers. I haven't seen anybody for a long time. Come over here. I want somebody to talk to besides my wife, or whatever. So she just
Right.
You guys all saw that, right?
You're in trouble.
Yeah, another thing is, what is this? I'm sorry, were you going to say something, Don?
I didn't get it.
Maybe you didn't see what happened, is what it
Yeah,
is.
I'm a little slow.
On verse 6, these three large measures that the New Living Translation, New King James says Sia. These are about 32 liters or 36 pounds of flour.
Wow.
And I thought it was really interesting that, the author, Moses, actually wanted to make sure we got that, because 36 pounds of flour, most bakeries will not be doing that. So this took some time. Now, obviously, Sarah had some servants, Abraham had some servants, so there were people who were doing this. But even with servants, bread takes a while to make, because
even
what they
slaughtering the calf, I would think, would take a long time too.
right. So we're thinking this
Sure.
was at least a day.
Mm-hmm.
But it also showed how generous Abram is, because, and again, if he knew that or if he didn't know who these people were, then yeah, that's pretty generous that he would actually get his whole family. We're thinking that 60 loaves of bread, or what, and a whole cow, or even a calf, that's not going to feed 5 people. He's thinking, we're thinking that Abram says, let's feast together with my family. And family could be, his trusted servants, or his whole servant. It could be his whole army. We all know that he is about 318 soldiers. And so it could be a lot of things, but it seems to me that for Abram, he wanted a celebration. He wanted a party with these 3 people. And again, whether he knew they were sent from God, or whether they're just ordinary people passing through, the text doesn't really give us that much, because again, as we've talked about before. Now, what's interesting is, when all of this was done, Sarah actually wasn't with Abram. All of a sudden, she just decides to go in a tent. I wanted to share some things with you on that. I don't know if any of you knew or even recognized that, or did that seem odd to you, that he first tells Sarah to prepare, and that's why the angel asked, I'm sorry, one of the men asked, it says here, where's Sarah? And the answer was pretty quick. She's in the tent. Well, what tent? I think this is where maybe culturally it would be good if we kind of know what it is. And again, all of this are at best guesses. At best they're educational, or they're, what is that again? They're not educational. They are yeah, they're guesses. I mean, we have some cultural backgrounds here. We have some things from the Bible. But what do you think? Did this stand out to you? That why would Sarah go inside a tent?
I think it was
I-
weird that Abraham
I-
waited on them too. It said
How
that
what?
Abraham waited on them in the shade of the tree, and then she was in the tent. So that all seems strange.
Mhm.
I'm kind of thinking that in their culture, uh, uh, the women don't appear until they're invited.
Hmm. Okay.
You know, there's basically second class anyway. So you just don't show up until I ask for you.
Well, they were supposed to cook, weren't they?
Well,
They had servants. So they had them.
Yeah, and I
that's what I'm
think
thinking.
that would be something that we could look into. Except if that was the case, then why would one of the men even ask? It seems to me that asking the question would assume, and again, I could be wrong, but it would assume that this was almost in a this either inappropriate or this isn't a tradition. Now, when Sarah came in, I'm sorry, when Abraham and Sarah went to Egypt, when they were invited to Pharaoh, both of them were invited. And even then, Abraham was like, "No, this isn't my wife. This is my sister." So there was an assumption almost that Sarah was not an ordinary slave, I guess. And so when the men said this, and the fact that, Abram said the answer was a specific tent, or she's in the tent. Some commentators actually say that the only place now, the only time women are in a tent is when they have their period. And we all know that Sarah's already at menopause stage at this point. And so one of the theories that came out is that the reason the angel, or I'm sorry, one of the men asked, is that he wanted that Sarah was in a tent that was strictly for women who was having a period. Now it makes it's pretty tough to figure this out because obviously she's in menopause, and no woman who is in her period can actually be near food. If anything, they actually have to be outside of the tent. Outside of the camp. But obviously, this was not during the time when any of those rules were in. And so part of the theory was that Sarah actually started having her menstruation sometime between when these men arrived. And the reason why the men even asked if this was obviously from heaven, these men wanted to bring out that something strange is going on here. And Abram's really short answer seems to be that even Abraham didn't know what was going on. It's like Sarah went into a tent, and she's supposed to be with them. She's supposed to be in this feast. But for whatever reason, she went into a tent, and maybe Sarah's saying, "Look, I don't know what's happening, but it seems like I'm bleeding." And again, it's a theory. But for me, I think it's a good one, because Moses or the author of Genesis wanted to bring out this little interaction, and every time there is an interaction, it's one of those things where we need to ask the question why, because Genesis has so little details to begin with, that if Moses adds any detail to anything, even without explaining what that detail is, there's a reason for that detail. And that's one of the things that some commentators say is the reason for that detail. And if that's the case, there's a reason why Sarah was still listening to the conversation, because she seemed to be really interested in what's happening between Abraham and these three men, because I believe that something has happened that was interesting to Sarah. And she's also wondering whether these people is sent from heaven. Were they angels or were they God? It seems to me that if Moses was going to use the word Yahweh in introducing these messengers from heaven, that there was at the very least an inkling or a guess that maybe these guests weren't ordinary people. What do you guys think about that?
Well, Frendo, I have a question. If it was regarding the party, I'm not trying to be argumentative, I'm just trying to think in my head. Why, if party, why would Abraham be standing back, not eating with them? And why would all of his servants or other people be there eating with them if it says they ate? Just the men ate.
I'm trying to look at where you said where it says
in the King James,
New King
on
James.
in the New King James
Verse
on verse
8.
8, it says, so he took butter and milk and the calf which he had prepared and set it before them, and he stood by them under the tree as they ate.
right. Okay, there it is.
And then if Sarah was having a period
Mhm.
or starting to have that, why would she have laughed?
Probably because the whole thing was so strange to her.
Mhm.
All of a sudden having a period again after not having it, and them saying she was going to have a baby. I mean, how would you react? I'd be kind of nervous and trying to figure out what was going on too.
But it would seem like it'd be more plausible now that she's having a period, because I'm assuming she's probably been long past the menstrual, that. So she probably hasn't had a period in a decade or more. And I would think that if somebody told you were going to have a child and you're thinking, okay, I'm having my menstrual period, that maybe that's not so strange a thing, but I don't know.
Yeah, and if this all happened in a day, I'm not even sure Sarah understood what was happening. It probably was so strange to her. But as far as your question, Sherry, I think this whole thing about letting the
No.
guest eat first, I know that's almost Filipino culture as well.
Mm.
It's really cultural. It's kind of like, potluck where we let the guest eat first. But I know for a fact that might not be as prominent in American culture as it is in Asian culture, where the guests always eat the best foods first. The guests always get to be served first. And I think Abraham was just doing that.
Okay.
I guess I never thought about why Sarah was in her tent, because I just assumed that she was probably still preparing food, even if they were eating, maybe she's preparing the next course or something like that. So I just always assumed she was in her tent because she was still making more food or, preparing more food, and that Abraham was just bringing the food out from the tent as she was making it and serving it or something. But I don't know.
That's the way I took it, was that she was still working on food.
Right.
Mhm. That makes sense.
Yeah, and this is the thing though, as far as anything in the Bible, there is most of the cooking was not intense. And so the only reason that commentators would wanted to bring out this whole tent issue is because the only time women are mentioned that they need to go inside a tent is because of somebody's having a period. Now, whether that's what's happening here or not, again, it's at best it's a guess. But some people have connected the two because, as far as what's proper in the culture then, and also what's Levitical law, is that whenever women is having a period, that somehow they're on a separate tent. They always need to be a separate tent. And of all the tents that Abram had, we don't also know where this tent is and why is it close to this tree where everybody was eating. But it seems to me that even eating was also outside, especially if there's just a lot of people in being fed. But again, all of those are, all of those are just trying to put together different pieces of the story. And it might be all not true, but for me, it's pretty intriguing.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing, which is, the whole final part of this story, is Abraham interceding for Sodom.
Yeah.
And this whole verse 17 and 18, when God, again, this is Yahweh here, when he asks, should I hide my plan from Abraham? That obviously is a rhetorical question, because he answers his own question, basically saying, no, because Abraham is too important for this. Now, think about this for a second. Why do you think God had to tell Abraham this?
Because of Lot.
I
His
know,
nephew.
but Abraham never had to go there to save Lot.
No, but he was wondering about if they took down Sodom and Gomorrah and wiped it out, what happens to Lot? Is he dead too? Probably would be. So,
Right.
I mean, it's just, if your relative is there, you want to know if he's going to be okay.
Okay.
That's right.
So you think God did it to as a, what is that again? A courtesy information to
That
Abraham.
he would be okay.
Okay.
Well, I think also it was a test that God was kind of testing Abraham's leadership. Okay, does he really care about anybody else? And so I'm going to tell him what the plans are and see what he says, see what he does. And so obviously, I think Abraham, like Fred was saying, Abraham obviously cared about Lot. Maybe there's at least 10. There's a lot more than 10 that are there. And so he was I always thought he was bargaining with God, kind of bargaining. Well, what if there's only this? And
Yeah.
Right.
Me too.
Well, here we begin to see God actually including Abraham in a judgment kind of decision. And he wasn't asking Abraham to change his mind. He wasn't asking Abraham for advice. But it seems to me that Abraham wanted to give advice. Because there was something about Abraham's reply that basically wanted to tell God, look, please don't do this. I get where you're coming from, but please don't do this. I think we should save Sodom if there's 50. And he starts with 50. I don't know why he starts with 50. I think in his mind he's like, oh wow, there's got to be at least 50, because at least Lot has, I'm thinking at least 50 servants. Lot has at least relatives there, that so there's at least 50. And God says, yeah, if there's 50, and he goes all the way to 10, which means that even he had to trust that his assumptions that there were about 50 people who were righteous weren't true. That he had to get God to say, yeah, I'll do it for 50. I'll do it for 40. I'll even do it for 10. I won't put any of this judgment. And after 10, I think Abraham says, all right, I get it. You really need to destroy this place. I know from me, this is where I think we can trust God, even with our own relatives, people we love. Because I believe, even sometimes in our discussion together, we ask questions like, well, what if? And we have a lot of what ifs. I think Abraham had a lot of what ifs. And God would actually say, yeah, if that was the case, I would save them too. But I think in the interaction, even Abraham, God wanted to include Abraham because he wanted Abraham to also understand where he was coming from. And for me, man, that's amazing that God would even include us in the whole process. And I believe when we get to heaven, because that's what the Bible says, during the whole millennium, we get to ask God, well, why? Surely there was a reason. And God would say, let's look at it. Let's look at it together. And I do believe that there'll come a point when, like Abraham will say, you're right. You're right. There's so many things I didn't know. There's so many things that I didn't know that you would do, that you did. And there's so many reasons why, or there's so many situations where they could have changed. But for Abraham, it's like, if we can't even find 10 righteous in Sodom, that means to me that even my own relatives there, even Lot's relatives, even his family, they're not even righteous. And even the 3 people who got saved in Sodom, Lot and his 2 daughters, which we'll find out, even his daughters weren't righteous. I don't know why they followed their father, but even when they were given their life, somehow God was not part of the equation. They decided that God would not be part of that equation. And because of that, their sons created Israel's greatest enemies.
I often wondered whether Abraham, obviously, I don't know how many years it's been, but obviously Abraham saved probably many of the inhabitants of Sodom when they were captured, when Lot and many of them were captured. So you kind of wonder whether he was like hoping, well, surely some of them believed in God, that God had helped me to rescue them. And, you wonder if there was an evangelistic part of Abraham that was hoping maybe that rescue would have turned some of them towards God, knowing that it was God's hand that saved them through Abraham. So I wondered if he was thinking about that. I don't know.
No, I'm sure he was, because this is where we begin to see that when Abraham was called a friend of God in the book of James, also in the book of Isaiah, he's called the friend of God. We begin to see that Abraham's heart has been changed so that it was like God's heart.
Mhm.
And that's why he was so generous. He's so generous to his nephew Lot. He was generous to these three people. He seems to be a person who wants to follow God's will in his life. And so because of that, he cares about people deeply. And I think it shows. That's why, he understood who God is, and you can tell how he respects God when he's talking to him. Please don't be angry with me. I know what I'm asking is pretty hard, but please don't be angry with me. And after 10, I think even he knew, yeah, you're righteous, God. I can't even ask anymore. I can't ask below 10. Any other questions or comments? All right. Because I think I know even for me, this whole thing about Sarah denying that she left is just hilarious for me. You begin to see in this chapter how both Sarah and Abraham were in a friend kind of relationship with God. You don't do this to someone who's not your friend. I think that's the one aspect that we need to understand about God, is we can have that friend aspect. We can argue with him. We can do all kinds of things with him. And obviously, when we get to the book of Psalms, it seems to me that we can also be angry with a friend and yet not relinquish that friendship thing. So I don't know. I think there's so many wonderful nuggets in this chapter. Okay, so if there's nothing else, I will stop the recording. Thank you for joining us at our prayer and Bible study session as we journey through the Bible one chapter at a time. We realize that you might have some questions or comments on the things that we discussed today. And if you do, please feel free to fill out the form below. Also, if you would like to have your own Bible, please fill out the form below and we will get back to you as soon as we possibly can. Thank you so much for joining us. We hope to see you next time at our prayer and Bible study session.